Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Happy PharmD podcast. With me, I'm really excited for a lot of personal reasons because I'm wanting to expand my mind even more. I'm joined today with Samm Anderegg. He's a pharmacist. He has run the gauntlet of a pharmacy career in administration, management, pharmacy care, and now he is the founder, CEO of DocStation, which is all about helping pharmacists and their online platforms, connecting all of the so many data platforms that are out there, making all of it not a mess, but making it simple and easy. I'm really excited because he comes from a different world in business. I've started a business on my own funding, so I'm going to learn a lot in this episode. I'm very excited. Samm, thanks for hanging out with me.
Awesome to be here, Alex.
So you grew up in rural Iowa. Not the place that most people think like, oh yeah, I'm going to find a founder of a business in Iowa. Did you grow up in Des Moines or like in the middle of nowhere in cornfield?
Grew up in middle of nowhere. There were a lot of cornfields around. We were a fairly decent sized city, I would say. I mean, like 7,000 people. To put that on scale,
Yep.
I mean, one high school, knew everybody in town, go to the grocery store and get stuck there for like 2 hours because you're catching up with people you haven't seen in a while. So, yeah, it was a good place to grow up, to be fully honest. But yeah, not typical, I guess, of every founder story.
True. So I have to admit, I had the chip on the shoulder. I said, no way. I'm never coming back. I'm getting out of this place. Spoiler alert, I'm actually living in the town I grew up in. I moved back home. It has a lot of benefits. Did you think to yourself, like, I'm moving out to the big city. I'm going to Des Moines. I'm going to live the city life.
I mean, I don't know. I think I try not to make a plan that's too far in advance.
Okay.
Because I don't know, you learn so much along the way, and so I think my opinions changed on that quite a bit. I did like the town that I grew up in, and so I always thought that there was an opportunity or maybe a chance to go back. I got a lot of good friends that have and are living great lives, but I think that when I went to school and got an opportunity to really fly the coop and go out, to the East Coast or somewhere completely different than anything that I've ever experienced before, you start realizing that there's people and things and topics and opportunities that aren't readily available back where you grew up. And so, I don't know, you just want to explore a little bit. I'm not counting anything out. You might see me back in Charles City someday.
Okay. All right. We'll keep Charles City posted. So you go to the University of Iowa. When did the idea of pharmacy come to you?
In high school, I mean, I had an older cousin who went to pharmacy school, and I had a lot of older cousins that I idolized, right? And so I thought that was the coolest thing in the world, and I wanted to do. I mean, the typical story, right? You're interested in science, you want to help people, but ultimately, I was really excited about being able to go into some sort of profession that was kind of undefined. I mean, you could be a scientist, you could be a community pharmacist, which I was familiar with, but you could also be like a clinical practitioner, like a primary care provider without having to go to med school, and save a couple of years on residency and go out and really create a practice, something that other people weren't doing before. So I think that's what really drew me into that. But yeah, having a role model to help you along and point in the right direction always helps.
Yeah, for sure. So you get into pharmacy school. Tell us about the progression of where you think your career is going. You start going to school. Where do you think the field of pharmacy you're going to get into? And tell us about how you eventually did do a residency and started practicing.
Yeah, I think I don't know. Have you ever taken the StrengthsFinder test, Alex?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have you ever used that before? I think back on this.
I don't want to get too technical with like the coaching side of things. I think it's a great test, but I think people struggle with seeing 5 different strengths that they have and then figuring out what in the world can I do with these things. They may be able to think individually, about each strength. Oh, I'm a maximizer or influencer or whatever the words they use are, but not how to put it all together.
Right. Are you anti-StrengthsFinder test or anti-personality test in general? I'm just curious.
That's how I started off. When I started career coaching and business coaching, we learned these are tools to help you maximize the performance of the people that you work with.
Sure.
Okay. So I started practicing, started implementing them to my clients. And what I found is that usually, like when people take these things, what they say is, oh yeah, I already know that.
Yeah.
And so what I found is just by asking, better questions of people, I was able to figure it out on my own just by listening. So that's my perspective. We do use it on occasion. We're actually developing a product now where we're giving an assessment to pharmacists to help them narrow down career options. I read a lot of your articles. You have a great pulse on what's happening in pharmacy and how there's this mass burnout and people feel stuck at jobs that they have, knowing that there's tough competition to get into any other kind of job. So where do you go from here?
Mhm.
That's the kind of problem we're trying to solve through an assessment, as well as matching those natural strengths that people have with potential career paths. But it's a really complicated mess. It's not just about, if all of a sudden you understand what you're naturally great at, you're going to build a career path in that direction. It's very, very complicated. So why'd you bring up that strength finders?
Well, I think I'm gonna jam on that one last thing that you just said. Is like you
Okay.
just take the test and then you look at these 5 strengths and you're like, oh, I know what I'm gonna be now. Uh,
Right.
but one of the strengths that I had, which probably 98% of all pharmacists have, is achiever, right? Where you're there because you are highly competitive and you had to work hard to get into pharmacy school and do all these things. That was the only one that I really resonated with. So I know that I wanted to do whatever the best was, which was residency, which kind of led me in that direction. But I wasn't introspective at all in kind of figuring out like why I wanted to do that or what type of residency, not down to like what the specialty, but like what sort of skills I wanted to work on or what characteristics may be best suited for what I had envisioned I wanted to do. I think at the beginning it was like primary care because I loved talking to people and just helping people. And I thought that I could do that in a situation where someone didn't have like a tube down their throat and, you were pushing epi and like
Yep.
high intensity environment. But I think eventually I learned that I really liked working with people, like not necessarily in the direct patient care environment, in the management type setting. When I started learning about like psychology, I mean, that's why I really like these personality tests because like you learn about yourself, you learn about other people around you. And I figured out that was really like management and administration and leadership. And so that's what got me into that whole world. I just figured out that they created residency programs for this, which is super unique. I mean, you don't really see these in medicine or any other profession. I mean, you have these MHA programs, but nothing structured in like a clinical type residency or fellowship. So that's why I was drawn to it. And
So
why,
you went the management PGY 1 and 2 and also got an MHA while doing it?
yeah, it's not an MHA, it's like an MS degree, MS in pharmacy,
Oh, okay.
which like, you have that on your
Right.
CV, and anyone outside of pharmacy is going to be like, what is that? But what
Yeah.
I learned is that it was just it's a historical degree, right? I mean, they set them up in the 70s, and it's part of these admin management residency programs. So yeah, but I got a lot of leadership training, and then took a lot of like finance courses and managing other people courses. So it was really good. I felt like that was awesome. I was trying to basically just make myself as versatile as possible, so I wouldn't have to choose what I wanted to do when I was done. And like
Okay.
put myself into a specific area, if that makes sense.
So you didn't box yourself in any one corner. What did you end up doing after that?
Well, I did what everybody else does after completing those programs. You take an entry level job, like a pharmacy manager at an
Yep.
academic medical center, and primarily, I mean, this isn't every program out there, but what these programs are trying to do is just train future pharmacy leaders. What I really liked about my residency was that they didn't say, hey, you're going to be a chief pharmacy officer one day and that's what you have to do. I chose it because there was a great clinical component, so I could go back into practice if I had to, heavy on the research, but also like encouraging to figure out what you want to do. Like, we're preparing you to do whatever it is that you choose in the future. That's what really drew me to it. But I ultimately just ended up taking the typical path. And it wasn't until 2.5, 3 years later until I really went through that burnout, where it caused me to reflect and say, what is it that I really want to do?
Well, walk us through residency to on doc. What does that journey look like for you? After residency, you start practicing, you get that entry level job. At some point you had burnout, whatever that looked like, and then, walk us to the creation of DocStation.
Yeah, I think residency is an intense experience, and luckily you go through it with other people. because you share all of the stress and really just hardships that you go through to execute all the things that you need to, but you come out of that strong and resilient. But the problem is there's no like, I hate to like relate this or give the analogy of like going to war. I've never served in the military and grateful for all the people that have, but I feel like that's maybe what it's like, because there's no transition plan. Like after you do that, there's no transition plan to be like, hey, this is how to live a normal life. And like, it's okay to take a couple days off for a week to go on a vacation or something like that. I think partially it was because I just loved the work. And so I just continued that type of pace. When I got in my first job, I was out there, I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to make an impact, make a difference, and just work to the bone, man. And that was a big reason that led to the burnout. But I think ultimately, like I wasn't in touch with, who I was, what I wanted, or even really thought about that up until the point where it was a crisis for me. I was just like depressed and sad and lonely and unhappy, and not even in a place where I was ready to make any changes. But, when you look at yourself in the mirror, you're just like, shit, you don't really have another choice. You got to figure out what you want and make a change. Like, get out of here if you need to. Like, so that made me reevaluate everything and really start with a clean slate. Like, here I am. Here's the training that I have. Here's what I like. I literally took out a list, or not a list, a notebook, and wrote down the most basic things that I enjoyed, because I couldn't think of anything that I was doing in my life at that point that wasn't enjoyable. So I still have that list. I should share it with you.
Yeah, that was really cool. What was the breaking point? What was the point where you were like, I got to do something? Because what I found with people with burnout, it's not like a disease. You have HIV or you don't. It's a progression, very similar to depression, where it builds up over time. The pain first is just subtle, and you start noticing people that you work with or patients, they become problems rather than actual people. And I find that people, when I talk with them about burnout, sometimes it's when they're in that situation, it's like there's a moment when they have that not out of body experience, but they realize what they're doing to someone else. And they realize this is not who I want to be, but maybe your experience was different.
No, I mean, like you start acting completely out of character, right? Where at some points you think that, patience is one of your strengths, and all of a sudden you're in a meeting and you're like interrupting people and like waving your hands in the air and pounding your fist on the table because you're so frustrated. People won't get on board with what you're trying to do. And it's the clear solution, there's no other way around it, and people just can't see it your way. Like that was wild. I remember walking out of that meeting being like, who am I? That was not you at all. But that's what really triggers it. You start, seeing yourself kind of from the outside looking in, right? You're getting a better look at yourself. You're like, this is not who I am. This is not who I want to be. But
I can relate. When I was going through my job, one of the biggest issues that I was facing was just my colleagues, my manager at the time. It was really tough. And I think I used that time to reflect on, I made the decisions that got me to this point. There are a lot of things that are outside of my control, but there are certain things that I can control, and I can try to look for a new job. I can try to start a business. And ultimately, that's the route I chose. For you, when you're in that kind of dark moment of the soul, did you find DocStation at that point where you're like, oh, I have this brilliant idea? Or was it, looking for a new job, or was it some other solution?
Great question. I think that you described it well in terms of you realize what's in your control and what you have the ability to do to kind of change the situation that you're in, right? But it's that little subtlety of having that realization that opens up all the possibilities, right? I realized that, like, man, I got to get out of here. And then you turn around and you're like, man, what do I want to do? Like, you can really do anything as long as you've got, is what I realized, as long as you have the basic needs covered, right? You got enough money coming in to pay for a roof over your head, cover your student loans. Unfortunately, that is a big issue, right? Cover those costs, be able to eat and, support yourself. And luckily I was in a situation where I didn't have, family to support either. I felt lucky to have that. It'd be really I think it's a lot harder for people but not impossible for people that are trying to navigate that situation. But, what I did realize is that what excited me when I thought about it was creating something or doing something on my own. And like software was not the first iteration of that. I actually, circling all the way back to Charles City, I still have a business plan saved in a pro forma built to open up a pharmacy in Charles City, Iowa.
Hey.
Yeah, and it would actually still work today. I ultimately, I did that entire exercise, spent a whole bunch of time and research. I went and met with the people that, ran the local community access hospital, and the people and the physicians and nurse practitioners who ran the clinic, and did all this groundwork. And at the end of it, I was just like, no, not going to work. More so I don't know that that's what I want to do. Right. And then I got really interested in the tech thing, and you see all these people building these companies, and it's exciting to think about. And in the back of your head, you never really think it's a possibility, but in the back of your head, you're always thinking, man, wouldn't it be fun to do that? Or man, I think would be really cool to design some software that could do this a whole lot better. And then that thought just kind of sticks in the back of your head and keeps gnawing at you. And then you Google how to start a startup and listen to some podcasts. Really, you look at the people who are out there talking about their startups that either failed or succeeded, and you realize that they're no different than you or I. They're not.
No.
And yeah, man, that was really it.
One of my favorite startup stories, I think it's actually on the Startup podcast by Gimlet, and they talk about this guy who was in jail for a few years, who's going to hire someone from jail, right? So what he did was he was in NYC, and he started hustling on the streets, saying he's going to be a bodybuilder, a body trainer, and help people get in shape. So he started handing out pamphlets to white chicks in yoga pants.
Okay.
And just started growing, this company where, he got a lot of people involved. I forgot what it was called. It's something catchy like Prison Fit or something. And he got funded by going that route. So, if a felon can do that, there shouldn't be reason why we don't have this happening more in pharmacy. I think we could have a very long discussion. I don't really want to. I want to focus on you and your story and what DocStation does. But I think there's a huge need right now for real entrepreneurism and innovation in pharmacy. That's the only way we're going to combat this job crisis, by creating new jobs rather than just fighting over the few ones that we do have left. So you go through this dark moment of the soul, you have this epiphany. Epiphanies are one of the most difficult things, I think, for anyone to go through. But on the other side, it's really great. In the moment, it's hard. And you come to the realization of what you actually wanted, and you look at the tech world. So do you come to this idea with any knowledge at all of how to program?
Zero knowledge how to program.
Okay.
Yeah, I could do Microsoft Access. I thought that was new. I was a master at pivot tables, but I didn't know how to lay it out.
Okay. So you come up with the idea, DocStation, and no knock to DocStation. It is not a new idea. There are plenty of new tech companies that have made billions by simply connecting, things. I think of Zapier for one. I use Zapier all the time to connect platforms, APIs, and technologies. You're simply applying it to the niche, the one that you know best. So tell us about the journey from, idea to actually, it becoming a reality. What was that?
I think you have this general idea, and then this is what residency taught me, the business side of things, is that you have to make sure that it's going to be viable, meaning that it's going to be profitable and there's a large enough market to grow it into. And so, I start the business model that we have now is very much different than what I thought it was going to be when we started. But you put that together and you're like, okay, this could be viable. At least, I think that we could build something that could make money. And after that, you're like, okay, if I believe that this could be a possibility, then is it do I want to do it? Do I want to pull the trigger or not? And had a conversation with my dad, and he's like, well, if you're going to do it, then you got to be all in, man. So yeah, that was the day I just decided, walked in, quit my job, and made the move. Put everything in storage. It sat in storage for it's still in storage, to be honest, and just went. And that was kind of freeing. And at that point, you just realize you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. So you just got to go for it. And there are little steps and little milestones that happen along the way to get us to where we are right now. I mean, we have a product, we have employees, we have customers, we have users, but it didn't happen all at once. It was these little milestones along the way that really got us there.
I'm curious, how long was the idea research phase for you for this idea?
For this idea, it was probably maybe 3 months. It was about 3 months because I'd already gone through the hard part of like deciding that I wanted to start something and create something on my own and done the business plan. So I already had like my Excel skills were like brushed up and I was good to go on that. So it really was research and like late nights listening to podcasts and understanding how startup economics worked and how you get that initial set of money to build the company that took the most time.
So, the route of business I chose is very different. The way I validate it is simply by making sales for basically a service. Coaching has been around for 50 years. It's been proven. Other people are doing it. It wasn't really hard for me to validate it. For you, though, you are not a programmer and you have an idea. Mm-hmm. So, did you end up like partnering with a programmer? Did you go out and get funding to hire the programmer to create the idea? What was that route like?
Yeah, well, it was the decision tree or matrix or whatever you want to call it. I knew there was 3 ways to move forward, right? I could learn how to code, which knew would take a very long time. Yep. But at that point, I knew that, there are people out there that know how to do this way better than I do. And how do I find that person or those people? And the next thing is like, okay, the next easiest thing is probably like money. Like, let's just go raise some money. Everyone raises a ton of money in Silicon Valley and everyone makes it look so easy. And there's such large numbers. Like, I'm just going to walk in to these investors and tell them that I'm a subject matter expert. I'm a founder that came out of this industry and I'm fixing a problem that I had, and that would be a good story. That doesn't work. It doesn't work very well. I mean, it has to be a really cool scenario where you've got a rich uncle or aunt, or you meet the right person that believes in you and has really got some they're looking for other ways to invest their capital. But really the only way that or the highest likelihood of someone being able to get a check without having a product, just having an idea, is if they've already built a company and exited before. That's what I've learned in my experience, and that's the Austin environment. I think maybe in the Valley, I haven't tried to raise out there yet, but like maybe it's a little bit easier out there because there's just so much more money. So yeah, I had to find a co-founder and going to networking meetups and stuff. And so like relying on serendipity was also not the best way to find the person that you were going to be working with for the next 12 years, unless some stroke of luck. I mean, we've gotten lucky along the way, but I knew that was probably not one thing that I would get lucky on. And I didn't have a high school buddy or a college buddy that was like an expert programmer. So yeah, I went on a founder dating site, and Josh and I met, and we met up in Tigo.
Had dinner.
Yeah, and just talked it over. And I'd worked with a few people before and like tried some projects, and you just fumble it back and forth, or they're not getting what you're saying and vice versa. It just doesn't feel right. And with Josh, it was like immediate. I was like, here's what I want to do. Showed him like this terrible PowerPoint animation that I made that kind of did what I thought it should do. And he's like, yeah, we can do that. And that's kind of how he reacts to certain things. He's like, yeah, we can do that. And he built a prototype in no time. And going back to what you were saying a little bit about, coaching as a service, right? You find a customer who's willing to, who wants your services, and then you provide it to them. Maybe you provide some things for free or discounted rate at the very start, but you at least have to have them experience what you're selling for them to know like whether they want to buy it or buy more of it, so to speak. So we needed to show somebody something, and an animated PowerPoint just wasn't cutting the cheese. And so Josh is a designer by education and training. He's an artist and a self-trained software engineer. So he built a prototype that was functional, clickable, looked like it was real to begin with. And, at that point in time, I was doing some consulting and going to a lot of conferences. I showed it to every person that I possibly could. That's what really like finding Josh. And that was like kind of the first game changer for us to have to show people.
The whole co-founder thing is something I've struggled with quite a bit. So recently, something I've been doing more of is becoming like a board of director for really early businesses. And they're not startups. They're not people that have, millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding. They are usually bootstrap type businesses because that's what I'm familiar with. When you were looking for that co-founder, because you saw there's no way I'm going to do this by myself, and because you're looking for the co-founder, you also thought, I don't have the funds to pay someone to do this.
Right.
What was like your biggest concern when looking for your co-founder?
I mean, finding someone that you can trust, someone that has the complementary skills that you do, but someone that you can trust and someone that you think that, we're going to be able to go through some tough times together and stick together. Because I think that's ultimately, the companies that you see last, the ones that don't fail are the ones that just persist, man, that just keep going, find a way to keep going. And, if you get into an argument or, a disagreement about one thing or another and you can't come together at the end, that's a recipe for failure. So that was my ultimate thing. I was like, can I work through difficult situations with this person? And, one of us, gets excited about something. Can the other one calm them down? Like really complimentary. And this was, again, a person that I had never met before. And, 2 or 3 weeks after we had met the first time, we agreed to like go into business together. So, you just kind of go on intuition, and it's worked out. And yeah, we're still together. I'm excited to work with him for another 10 years if he allows me to.
Yeah, partnerships like a marriage. You got to be willing to weather the hard times, and that's great that you found someone. So you guys got together. He built the product. Do you go out and start testing it, or you seek funding? What is that? I'm guessing this is like the official first year of DocStation. What did that look like?
I was still working part-time, paying the bills again, and he was working his full-time job, and we were just putting in sweat equity on the side, like 68 hours a week total, doing what we could. So I was out there trying to like basically sell the prototype or talk to investors about the product and like have an investor deck, and do that whole thing. And I just realized after enough conversations with investors, like I wasn't talking to the right people. Like they didn't know healthcare and they didn't know pharmacy, and then like not willing to really take a bet. So I think there are probably investors out there that maybe would have given us some seed funding at the beginning, but I didn't find them alone anyway. And then, it's about just like you need to talk to the right investors, you have to talk to the right customers as well. So we talked to pharmacies and just realized pharmacies don't have any extra money to pay for their 9th platform because they're already using 8, So I'm like, this isn't going to work. Like we can't sell this to pharmacies. Who's getting the most value out of that? Well, it's the payers, right? And so you start, talking to payers and figuring out what their needs are and what they're trying to do. And, CMS was spinning up an innovation program called Enhanced MTM, and they were trying to study innovation. And that's what those programs are really designed to do. They're designed to, seed fund innovative ways to take care of patients. And we were lucky enough to find one of the health plans that were participating in that program and get locked in. And so we've been doing that since beginning of 2018. Going on our 3rd year. And that's really what our first funding was like and what allowed us to, hire an engineer and then 2, 3, and then eventually build out a whole team. So right now I feel like we have a core team that's ready to play ball, my friend. Like what I'm so proud of it. I had no idea that this could be done like in this amount of time. You can kind of see like the very end, like the 20-year vision from now, what that looks like. But the 3-year thing, I am like elated, man. I'm having so much fun. But yeah, we wouldn't have been able to do this without that opportunity. And because of that program, we got accepted into an accelerator program called Techstars, which people in the tech community know. It's basically like a 3-month residency program. That's how we got over that first like major funding hump and got into where we are right now.
It's a good point that I want future aspiring entrepreneurs to recognize that one way to fund your startup or your idea is to ask the government for funding. My local friend here, he has a manufacturing company and a real estate company, And I learned from him that he gets lots of grant money to remodel his buildings through, downtown restoration efforts. And I was like, what? The government is giving you grant money, while you are hustling, making money from that? I was blown away. But it happens all the time. So now fast forward to today. DocStation, you said, you thought your original customers were pharmacies, people actually providing pharmacy care. But you switch targets, and that's a huge switch. And I think you made actually probably the right decision, because who has all the money right now?
Right.
It isn't pharmacies. When you made that, actually, I'm interested. When you made that switch, did you have to overhaul everything and create a whole new process, or did you kind of just streamline along with what they needed?
Yeah, I would say it didn't change what we were trying to do with the product at all.
Okay.
We knew what we wanted to do, like build a platform that sits between the pharmacist and the health plan, not the PBM, the health plan, right? And
Hmm.
so, physicians have EHRs, and they were built in the 70s and built as billing software, and then the clinical documentation was like bolted onto that over time until you have this kind of weird Frankenstein type tool that's really hard to get to do what you want it to do, right? And so, like, what if we just did that, built that from the ground up in a market where there is no EHR, right? Pharmacy. So we had to have that connection regardless. But it was just a matter of like, which of the tools did we build out first, or how do we get our first funding? And so the health plan's incentivized to want to save money, save on total cost of care, and they want pharmacists to do that. How do you create a direct connection to the health plan? And so, yeah, we didn't shift the product. It was really a shift in just sales, like mentality or business development. So instead of, going door to door and showing up at, independent pharmacies who, you got a network,
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of good friends that were, yeah, stop on by and, we'll show you what we're doing. And, had a relationship already built to like go and knock on the door to like a United or a Humana or, somebody like that. You're just like, whoa, I am out of my league here. But, you just do it and you have those conversations. And so there's a whole strategy to enterprise sales, and I'm still learning as I'm going, but that was the big change. But ultimately we're still building the same tool.
I think I saw that. You documented that in the road trip, right? Where you went over like the Midwest, Iowa, and you went pharmacy to pharmacy, checking out what people were doing, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's another example of just chicken or the egg thing. So
Hmm.
once the health plan comes on board and says we want to save money through pharmacists, then you're like, okay, well then now I got to go, convince some pharmacists to use the tool. But it's the same way in the opposite direction as well. I mean, we just don't have enough people. I would love to go on another road trip. We have to like, Montana and in North Dakota. We just haven't documented them. But yeah, that was part of it. And that's man, I love that piece of it, is really getting back to where pharmacy's at today and where it started and what we're trying to do. We're trying to go through this transformation, and people are working their asses off, man. I mean, they're fighting for their survival.
Yeah.
And it's go time, man. And so to get in there and understand what they're going through and trying to build the tools to make their job easier, that's the most fulfilling part of the job. Because even though that I'm not providing patient care anymore, like we're building tools that for the people that are. And yeah, man, get a lot of joy out of that. Wish I had more time for it.
So you could submit applications to. We were chatted briefly about some of the coming changes, and I think a lot of people are unaware, and I definitely don't know much as what you do about the e-care plan.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the typical, boots to the ground pharmacist may have heard of this, may know what's coming, but let's dive into that topic of what's new with the e-care plan and what do you see happening because of it? Actually, that's what I would really like to know, but give us all kind of a starting level.
Yeah, so e-care plan is something I'm very familiar with. Worked on a lot of the components that go into it. What it is just a mechanism to transfer data from one place to another. It's called e-care plan because it's really every single component of a patient record in an electronic format that you can send to another place. But it could be sent to a payer. It could be sent from a pharmacy over to a physician's EHR, wherever you really want it to go. And so, it has been really it's a force, one thing that people can rally around to represent transformation of pharmacy. to a clinical
Mm.
profession. It is what we need to send. Like if you're going to send and report data to a payer and get reimbursed for those clinical services, that has become the thing to rally behind. And so I think right now, like the promise of it is that it's a key to reimbursement from payers, right? It's an easy way to walk into a payer and say, hey, you want to work with us? If we send you the e-care plan that's got a whole bunch of clinical data, you can do whatever you want with it. Will you pay us for that encounter of providing care to that patient? So it's also like that combined with it being a marketing tool. If I can say e-care plan is the way to go and everyone knows that, we can all stand around and chant e-care plan. People like it's creating a movement. And what Troy's doing in North Carolina and CPSN, you familiar with all those guys? Yeah, it's like it is a movement, man, and it is a force to be reckoned with. And what is interesting now is that I want to make one other point. So like the e-care plan it's still in this fee-for-service world, right? If I submit an e-care plan, it's just like submitting a claim. It's not truly value-based care. And if the whole rest of the market's shifting to value-based care, we can't stay in a fee-for-service world. So how are we going to facilitate that?
What's funny is you said fee for service, and my immediate thought was we're still product based. We're like 2 generations behind in our profession. We are still tied to the product, even though our bodies that represent us have been hooting and hollering about fee for service for years for adoption, that we should be paid for our services, and little has changed. And I would say I've solidified my thoughts that on the whole provider status thing, as great as I think it is, and that it's something that should have been done a long time ago, my thought is pharmacists are not going to adopt this in mass. And my evidence for this that I often have pointed to in the past is other countries' adoption of the same regulations. If you look in Canada, Alberta, I believe that's the province where Quebec is, has one of the lowest rates not one of the lowest, but I believe the rate of acceptance of provider status, according to like a 2014, 2015 study, said that about 2% of pharmacists had provider status. And in the UK, this is also from, I think, a 2013 study. They said that they had 10% of pharmacists adopt provider status. And that legislation had been in place for 10 years. And I read this actually, I think, on an APHA article. And, it was like provider status around the world. And, it was coming from a place of, we need to celebrate this. This is a good step. And yes, of course, hey, it's great. But if this is the case, do we really think we as pharmacists in our nation are going to, accept it in mass?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, have you looked at, the rate of adoption in the states that have passed provider status? Like in California, for example, I think you need like some sort of advanced certification or designation.
Yeah, the advanced certification, right. So
how many
that's a great question. Listeners, tweet at us or whatever, but I actually don't know that. But what I know is that it's nearly impossible for the typical pharmacist to obtain the necessary things to get that certification. You need hours of service. And when you're in a quote non-clinical, which is dumb, a non-clinical role, they won't count any of the hours. So it's just causing elitist status within our profession, separating people, making, mostly community, but also in the hospital, people feeling like they're second-class citizens. And it's only pushing our BS farms further down the totem pole. Now, I don't want to say that to say there's no hope for these people, but it's things like this that make it impossible when making, that certification a requirement for a job. It's very frustrating.
Oh, yeah. It's shooting ourselves in the foot, right? Like we worked so hard to get here. Now we're going to make it extra hard for you to even practice in the way that we envisioned our profession.
Right. It's like even before we get the ability to practice at that level, they say, well, we're going to put the wall up here now.
Right. Yeah.
Honestly, so frustrating.
It's true. And like, honestly, I just let my board certification lapse. And
really?
Yeah, I did. I was like, it's partially because I have just been so busy, like working, and have just like not thought about the hours. But at the end of the day, I was like, am I going to rush to try to get all these credits to get my board certification and continue to pay $125 every year for the next year of my life? What is that actually getting me? It's perpetuating the problem of elitism. Like we're trying to match medicine in a certain way, but like my belief, you got your license, you've got your degree, you should be able to practice, to the highest tier of your license. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
and within the scope of practice that the state allows. Like the people that are actually doing things are the people at the state level, and like pushing our pharmacists to practice that's what it is, practice at the top of their license. That's really advancing care. It's not about the board certifications. I mean, it's a mechanism to have a higher degree, but it's a lot of ego, I think.
And on top of it, you mentioned psychology. It's also been a fascination of mine over the last 3 years. Not only do we attract a certain type of people, but we also nurture them to think a certain way. And we have all these degrees and certifications, and you see these pharmacists with 12 letters after their name. And I'd have to argue that, of course, these certifications advance our practice knowledge, it advances knowledge, but how much of it is actually used? And is it actually necessary to do a job? Or is it just that, you wanted a $1,000 raise per year because of what the job offers you? Yeah, it's very frustrating, but we got a little bit off topic.
But I mean, I think going back to the point where we started is like, let's not create additional barriers to achieve the things that we're all collectively trying to achieve. Let's try to make it easier. And to continue, like you mentioned, Canada has a low adoption of pharmacists actually practicing after provider status was achieved. And we talked about California. I think the ultimate thing is like, how do you make it as easy as possible for a pharmacist to open up a clinic tomorrow, right? You have to make it easy for them to navigate the barriers to certification. You have to make it easy for them to set up a collaborative practice agreement with a physician. You have to make it easy for them to bill the insurance company. And I've got 8 more fingers, and I can name off one thing for every single one of those just to be able to build a sustainable practice. So my whole goal here is, and that's why I think that the adoption is limited in a lot of these different areas, is because no one makes it easy. If you just make it easy to do these things and bring in a little bit of money to sustain yourself as a provider, then we can create an entire army of primary care providers to solve the access problem in America and provide the care to patients that they need in rural areas, in urban areas, and wherever it may be, and really improve outcomes, and then get paid for the value that we're actually providing. And so that's the ultimate goal. Like, we're navigating payers and MTM and CCM and 837P forms and like all this stuff that we talk about every day. We're trying to take on the burden of that complexity and produce a product that is so simple that anyone, any pharmacist, whether they're young, whether they're old and ready to retire, can turn around and pick it up and just see a patient immediately and know that they're going to get paid to do that.
I don't know if I have any other questions after that. That was good. It's got me excited. I've said this in many times in many different ways now. The only way we're going to solve the job crisis is by creating jobs. The main reason why I don't do a lot of business type interviews with people that potentially have a service for pharmacists, but the reason why I actually wanted to talk to you was because I saw this as a very simple solution that is solving a huge problem right now. The way I think about it from, again, the pharmacist on the ground, their perspective, this is such a complex issue that there isn't a simple solution to look to that can create that additional revenue that is needed right now. I mean, everyone is so desperate. It's clear because we're seeing pharmacies in mass turning towards the things that are profitable and recommending, supplements, nutritional things, cannabinoids. And on top of that, we're seeing them turn into cash only businesses, which arguably is bad and good. And I think for pharmacists to stay alive in the profession, that's what we're going to need to turn into. But to highlight what I think DocStation is doing, it's making the process of turning a business around into a service-based business that is making it much easier because of how complicated our healthcare payer system is. I don't know if you have anything else to bounce off at that, but that's kind of just the last thoughts that I have about everything you've shared.
Yeah, you nailed it, man. It's a long road. There's a lot of hurdles to jump through. There's a lot of problems to solve.
This is a podcast, and I always enjoy like those NPR things when they go behind the scenes, and you hear what people are really saying when something is going on, like a senator in the audience of the House of Representatives, and they're like, "Whoa, what?" I'm sure you have lots of politics going on standing against you because of the people that are in power.
There's a lot.
More power to you.
Man, yeah, in all directions. You got to find out who your allies are, man. And if you come and you wear your heart on your sleeve and you really try to do what you believe, there's people out there that see that. And so work with them and just keep pushing forward. Persistence, going back to that persistence thing, man.
Sam, I want to thank you for hanging out with me. This has been a real fun conversation, and I feel like we could talk a lot longer, but I want to respect your time and just thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And if more people want to check out DocStation, they can go check it out. Go to the website, docstation.co. Make sure you check it out. There are some great videos on there. And I encourage you also to check out their blog. It's not like the typical startup that I find where people are more secretive. One thing that I respect about Sam is just his willing to share the story. You can see like where they've come from. You see them on the road, traveling, meeting with pharmacists. It's very encouraging, and I hope it inspires you chase your crazy idea that you think could never become a reality. Sam, again, thanks for hanging out with me.
Thank you, Alex.